Welcome to Red and Yellow, the podcast about all things to do with refereeing at grassroots level, looking at the laws of football, speaking to guests and trying to help you become a better referee, with Adam Humphreys and me, Ed Connell.
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Red or Yellow. Is that the name we're going with, yeah?
It is the name we're going with, I think, yeah.
Excellent. I'm Adam Berry or Humphreys, depending on what field of the world you know me in. And sitting across from me, or not quite, but on the other side of the world, is
Ed Connell. And as Adam's just said, I'm sitting here on a Friday evening in London, and Adam is in Australia. And what time is it there, Adam?
It is currently 5:13 in the morning.
It would have been much better if we'd had the idea of this podcast when you were living in London.
Yes, but when I was living in London, I didn't like to admit the fact that I really didn't know the laws of football.
And I suppose we should probably explain how it is that we know each other, because we didn't meet through the world of refereeing, did we?
We definitely didn't know. We met through the world of Twitter.
We did. And I was looking for a personal trainer, and I came across you on Twitter, and you were my personal trainer for, I don't know, a couple of years maybe?
Yeah, 2 or 3, I reckon, off and on. And we've remained friends ever since, which is kind of the dream. It's bizarre because I never use Twitter, like never, like zero. And it was very odd to me that I found such a good friend, but also that I found a client on Twitter. It was so random because you also had like a semi-interest in my acting as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because I'm a sort of wannabe actor turned lawyer. So the fact that you had an acting background and you're a personal trainer was a good combination.
And then how did we bond on refereeing? Was that just a coincidence?
Well, no, I think that what happened was that you learned that I refereed, then I learned that you refereed, and we actually ended up refereeing together. It sounds very glamorous, but we ended up refereeing together. Was it in France?
It was Rome.
It was Rome.
Yeah.
So my to sort of put that into context, my intro into refereeing was I used to play and manage for an LGBTQ football team, and we were playing unaffiliated football, and we were struggling to have referees who could referee for us, because back then, and regrettably still now, there were some people that were very afraid of doing unaffiliated refereeing because they were worried about sanctions from the FA. So the very easy solution was to have members of the community trained to be a ref. So that's what I did. I suspect about 15 years ago, I never really had the ambitions of sort of going up the ladder in terms of refereeing. I was just sort of wanting to do the leagues that I was involved in. I did start and still do occasionally some local affiliated football leagues, but most of my refereeing is still for these sort of LGBTQ leagues, of which there are a number, but the ones I'm involved in are based in London, the UK. And then there were international tournaments that came out of that, and we were looking for referees. And that's when I asked you if you fancied coming away with a whole load of LGBTQ people, even though you're straight. And you said yes.
And that was an experience. It was a joyful experience as well. And it was actually during my retirement. So for those listening, I was a referee. I don't know. I think I've been refereeing maybe like 7 or 8 years. But in that, I've had a hiatus. So I had 2 and a bit years off because I kind of did climb the ladder. I got up to what's called a level 4 referee in the UK, which is very different over here. Over here, level 4 means you're like bottom of the pile. But
UK, you start at level 9, don't you? And then you sort of work your way down towards sort of 1, which is the sort of the best referees. So you got up to which level in the UK?
I got to level 4, and I nearly got to level 3, but it was during my marathon training, and I had a terrible assessor. It's always the assessor's fault. And I injured myself in that game, and that was one of those games where I got in my car after. I'd pulled my tibialis anterior, which is like the muscle that runs down the front of your shin, and the whole game was just a wreckage. And it was like 11 o'clock at night. I had to be up at 4 o'clock the next day. And I was just like, I sat in my car and just went, this is ridiculous, knowing I'd blown my promotion and everything else. And I was just like, this is nonsense. And I wasn't willing to play the game. Like a lot of people at my level, they're like, you would close games they didn't want to walk into if they thought it'd be a problem and stuff like that. And so, yeah. So then that day I decided I'm probably going to give this up. And I went through that season. Then I got to Christmas that year and I retired because I knew I was coming to Australia. I knew that I just wanted to spend more time with my fiance. And that was it really. And it was taking up a lot of time because obviously at that level you're traveling. Like I remember on a Wednesday night I had to travel like past Norwich, and I used to live in like Essex. It was like a 2.5, 3 hour trip just for one game of football there and back. Then it was another 2.5, 3 hours on a Wednesday night. And it just started to become a bit unmanageable really. So I retired and didn't ever think about going back. And I didn't actually miss it. Um, and so during that retirement, like it was the following summer, you said, let's go to Rome. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I did. And it was a
So
lot
that
of fun.
was for the effectively the European sort of gay football cup with teams from all over Europe. In fact, not just Europe actually, it was teams from all over the world, weren't there? Because there were some teams I think from the US there.
Yeah.
And it was nice because normally at these competitions it's sort of referees solely from the LGBTQ community, but I think we had some sort of non-LGBTQ people there apart from yourself as well. But no, it's good. Just to put into context, though, level 4 that you were on and level 3, what does that equate to in terms of the footballing pyramid?
So level 3 is you can be an assistant referee on the is it the conference? Yeah, you're an assistant referee on the Conference South, and you can be a middle in the Isthmian League, or I think it's called the Northern Prem or the Southern League. Where we were around London, it was the Isthmian League. And then level 4 was a step down from that. So I was allowed to assist on the Isthmian League, the Southern League, or the Northern Prem. And I was a middle referee for I think it's called Contributory League football, which was like the Essex Senior League that I was in, or the Spartan League if you're in Northern London. Yeah, and that was cool. Or it's called I can't remember what it was, up and sort of like up towards Suffolk and Norfolk. But yeah, there was a league there that you could be on. But also the other thing at that level as well that I found frustrating was I'd be doing 8 or 9 lines a month, and I'd be lucky if I got a middle. And I was like, I don't mind being an assistant referee, but I'm definitely now here in Australia, like where I'm doing 4 or 5 games a week, like I've really hit a groove of being a middle referee and really blooding myself, and like I'm in a pattern and I'm used to doing it. I know how to deal with that, but you just couldn't get a rhythm going at level 4 for that. And then that's what you were judged on in terms of your promotion. So it was hard. It was just difficult. And, actually taking a break probably has made me a better referee now because I appreciate it so much more.
And what level in the UK do you start to either elect or you're told as to whether your career continues as a middle or as an assistant?
I think the next level up. So when you go from 4 to 3, at level 3,
Right.
you have to decide if you're going to keep like what pathway you're going to go up. I think at level 3, you still have to do middles, but you can then also go up as an assistant referee onto the championship. And further if you're good enough. Yeah, I think it's that level. It might have changed. Like I'm a bit out of the loop of UK refereeing, to be honest.
So before we you sort of can fill people in on what you're doing in Australia refereeing wise, just to sort of juxtapose your experience with mine. I'm still a level 7. I've never sought to get any higher than that. I don't have any ambitions of getting higher at all. I like just doing sort of the level I do. I'm just an avid football fan that enjoys still being involved in football. So we come at this podcast from different ends of the spectrum, but you've resurrected your refereeing career in Australia. So what's been happening there?
I think I just got bored of not doing anything, to be honest. And so about this time last year, I sort of sought out how to become a referee again. And luckily the FA wrote me a letter saying that I could transfer and carry my current level status over into being into a Football Queensland referee. And so now I referee. It's not quite as strict over here. Like it's not as perfectly organized as it was in the UK. But here I can kind of do. They have like 4 main leagues. They have they have 5. They have the A League, which is their professional league. Then they've got the National Premier League, the NPL. Then they have FQPL 1, which is like Football Queensland Premier League 1. Then they have QPL 2, and those 2 are statewide competitions, I think, or they might be like more, yeah. And then you have FQPL 3, which is split into regions. So you've got FQPL 3 South Coast, which is what I do down here when I'm doing FQPL 3 on the Gold Coast. Then you have one Metro, which is like Brisbane, and then you have the Sunshine Coast. And so I do a mix of QPR 1, 2, and 3 throughout the season.
How do you say that compares to the sort of UK? Would you say you're?
Well, I don't want to annoy any players listening, so I better be careful.
It's a very high standard. That's what you want to say.
Believe it or not, I stick out like a sore thumb, being this English, loud, very vocal referee. No, I'd say probably the A League is probably the equivalent of. I mean, I haven't watched a lot of A League football, and they do get a lot of ex-Premier League players in there, but that's probably in real terms Championship level football. I don't think, even though it's like the professional league, and then the NPL is probably like conference level, maybe League 2 level. That's the National Premier League, and then FQPL 1 is probably low level conference or kind of high level contributory league football. And then it kind of just dwindles down from there. But like that being said, the differences between QPL 1 and QPL 3 aren't that great. I find I work as hard in a QPL 3 game as I do in a QPL 1 game. And that's partly because of the way they've just restructured it. And so the teams are still finding really where they need to be. And we're just coming to the end of the season. So last week I had semi-finals. I was the referee for the under-23 semi-finals. And then this week I'm fourth official on the finals for FQPL 3 on the South Coast. And then the next couple of weeks, it's the bigger leagues. Oh, and tomorrow I've got an FQPL 1 final. So, yeah.
And do you have any aspirations to sort of go higher up the ladder?
I'm getting too old, Ed.
Well, I'd say it's a young man's game, but it seems that all the Premiership referees are all sort of.
It's crazy. Older. It's great. The difference in my body between now and then, between like sort of now being 35 and when I was refereeing sort of 28, 26, 27 is crazy. Like how much stiffer I'm getting and how like harder it is to recover. Like if I can make NPL, that would be awesome. Like that'd be pretty good level for me. National Premier League, I think I could do it. And then from there, it is what it is, right? Like there's lots of good referees here, actually. It's a really good community. It's a small community as well. Like we all kind of know each other. There's not that many, but then there's not that many games to referee on the National Premier League either. Like it's only a league of like 12 teams. So, like if I could pick up a couple of fixtures next season, I'd be happy with that on the National Premier League. In terms of getting onto the A League, I don't know. I'm probably past that now. The time's probably against me, but you never know if I can keep fit and healthy.
So our original plan was we were going to go through the 17 laws of football. Some of them are going to take up perhaps more than one episode. Some are perhaps not so exciting. And rather sadly, law number 1 is perhaps one of the less exciting laws of football that we can deal with. But I was just going to say something very quickly because I don't know whether people always know exactly where sort of the rules of football come from, but the laws of football that we all use are from IFAB, which is the International Football Association Board.
Well, I know them as LOAF. Have you ever heard it called LOAF?
No, I'm not.
So we always used to call it LOAF, and that was known as the Laws of Association Football. So it was only a couple of years ago, I think it changed to IFAB. I might be wrong in that, but yeah. So I know it as LOAF, but yeah, it is IFAB.
I hadn't appreciated, though, that the actual body that determines laws of football, which is now IFAB, was established in 1886. So it was a long time ago.
Right, yeah, 1886. Is that when football was born?
Well, no, I think football was born before then because the first written down laws of football come from 1863 from Sheffield FC.
Right.
They wrote down what were about 10 rules. They make for interesting reading. They don't contain anything that relates to law number 1 as they currently stand. But I didn't realise that the body is made up of the 4 British FAs, that's England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, plus FIFA. So the sort of 4 British ones get a vote each, and then FIFA gets 4.
Right.
FIFA apparently sort of accepted IFAB as being the sort of having the jurisdiction over the rules from about, I think, 1904.
Oh, wow.
And so although FIFA represent 207 national associations, they only get 4 votes as a result of that. But
so England the UK controls quite a lot of power when it comes to changing football.
Yeah,
Isn't
and
that interesting?
the way that you get a rule change is they have an AGM each year, so you have to propose a rule change, and it has to get a 3/4 majority to pass.
Right.
So that's kind of how it works. And but it's quite interesting because the as you'd expect, the people who make up the various committees and members of IFAB are lots of people who've been involved in football before. So there are people like Arsene Wenger is involved as an advisory panel member, Luis Figo, and then you've got referees like Pierre Luigi Collina, that everybody remembers.
Collina will be there.
And David Ellery and people like that. So unsurprisingly, you've got lots of former sort of footballers, referees who are involved in helping bring about the law changes. But as people probably also recognise, it's a fairly conservative organisation. We don't tend to have dramatic rule changes year on year. There's a few each year, but they're a pretty staid bunch.
A couple of years ago, I think it was just as I was retiring or having a hiatus, I suppose, as I now need to call it, they changed an awful lot of them that season. Like they changed an awful lot of them. And that's kind of why I wanted to get this podcast on. So when I came back into doing refereeing, I remember reaching out to you and going, dude, I need help. Like, I don't understand the laws anymore. Like I've pretty much forgotten them. And I'm personally like a more auditory learner, like rather than sitting there reading things. I'm not like you, like a lawyer. I'm artistic, darling. And so I need that kind of like discussion about it, and I'll understand it so much more if I have that. And I was looking for it and I couldn't find anything. There was nothing on YouTube. There was not a podcast like this that just nailed the laws, spoke about them in a practical way for like real people, but also where you could just listen to it and just kind of hope it kind of goes in through osmosis. Hence I reached out to you and was like, we need to do this podcast, and you agreed. You was like, yeah, no, there is a problem there. And since then as well, since I've spoken to people about this podcast, loads of other people have said, it'd be great to have something to listen to on the way to my games that just break down the laws, discuss it, just so you keep, because you can't read it while you're driving. It's kind of dead time on the way to a game. Be a good way to use your brain. So that's kind of like the brainchild of the podcast as well. So yeah.
And a great point of reference, because I don't know if you've got it on your phone, but I've got the IFAB app on my phone, which you can sort of look at each of the laws in turn. And what I also like about it each year is they do a sort of section on the law changes, and they sort of do break down and simplify the sort of the law changes that occurred each year. But there were no changes to law number 1 this year. So law number 1 is, as it's been, I suspect, for a bit of time. And law number 1 is the field of play.
It is indeed.
Not particularly exciting.
It's not. Well, no, but it's important, right? It's one of those things that you think, really? You have to have a law about that? But when you get into it, you kind of really do. So what's cool is you can change on the website, you can change the thing from meters to yards, which is quite interesting. And national and international play seem to have different rules, which is odd. Sorry, not rules, are they? They're laws. No. Like, I kind of was hoping we could go through it and read the laws, but this one is so boring. We want to keep people interested in the podcast as opposed to turn them off. So is there anything in law 1 that you think we need to highlight and be like, look, practically on your park on a Saturday or Sunday morning, this is important? Or practically maybe like, because what I find is it's so easy for us to compare the way we referee to like the Premier League or, the Champions League or whatever. And it's just, even though it's meant to be the same sport at that level, it's clearly not now with VAR and things like that. But like, I find comparing yourselves to those games is just irrelevant when you're doing the kind of football that you happen to do, like community football and stuff. And it can be a big, it can send people down the wrong path sometimes in terms of just managing the game and what to expect. And it's not practical for like a 16, 17-year-old who's stepping out on his field and he's got a game of 11 men or 22 men who are drunk on Saturday night and hungover on a Sunday morning playing dog and duck versus, I don't know, the King's Head. And so like there are some things in this law that practically would help those people, but equally would help me at my level and you at your level. So is there anything you think sticks out in terms of that?
Not really. I mean, the only takeaway point for me for law number 1 was there are parameters for what is an official pitch size, and the sort of general rule is that the touch lines have got to be longer than the goal lines, which comes no surprise to you. So that means you can't play on square pitches; you're playing on rectangular pitches.
Indeed.
The only thing that really I found quite interesting, and I have to say that I don't think this law is particularly exciting from a practical point of view, but I didn't realise there was such a divergence in sizes, because in the UK, there's the touchline has a minimum of 90 meters, but a maximum of 120 meters. This is like a 30-meter range as to what is a legit touchline length, and I mean that's quite a lot.
It is, and it sucks when you step onto that pitch and you're like, "Oh, hang on, why is this pitch so big?"
Well, exactly. I mean, you know, when you go on a pitch, either as a player or referee, you know immediately if it feels like a sort of big pitch.
Yeah.
And the reason why some pitches feel big and some pitches feel small is because there is that sort of divergence. And insofar as the goal line is concerned, that can be between 45 and 90 meters. There's a huge sort of ability to sort of vary the size of pitches. I think when it comes to international matches, there's a much greater consistency. I think the range for what's a legit touchline, but you have to be between 100 and 110 meters, and the goal line's got to be between 64 and 75. So they are much stricter, it seems, than we are here in the UK. But I was actually really quite surprised. I didn't quite appreciate as to sort of how much difference there is. The only thing I suppose you need to know is about the penalty spot, which is always I think it's 11 meters from the middle of the goal line.
Correct.
And then obviously you've got your sort of circle that radiates from that, which sort of dictates the edge of the 18-yard box, and why you have that sort of semicircular shape. That's because there's a sort of a circle being drawn from where the penalty spot is. But
that's because players have to be 9.15 meters away from a dead ball.
So there we go. So that explains why the 18-yard box has that sort of semicircular shape on the outside of it, because it's a distance keeping away from the penalty spot. And that really is it. And when it comes to sort of the main parts of law number one, I mean, the only other interesting thing is about flag posts and corner posts.
Yep. I think they're important, because it'd be so easy, wouldn't it, for you to rock up to a pitch and you not have corner posts. And so, but I think they're really important. I think you must if I'm more concerned. It's one of the things we was told when I was first starting, you cannot do a game without corner posts. You just can't. And you might think, well, that doesn't really make sense. And it's a hard thing to sell to players when they haven't got them. You're like, we have to have corner posts. But I think it's really important in a game, because you could get a big problem if you got a corner or a throw-in wrong, that decision wrong. And especially if you don't have decent assistant referees, they are important. And also in terms of the safety of them, they have to be a certain height, and they have to be obviously a non-pointed top. So I would say if there was one thing...
They've got to be over, must be at least 5 foot high is what
that's so you don't fall on top of them and impale yourself. I think, can you hear the cleaners? I've got people hoovering around me, so I'm sorry if the sound's a bit dodgy. What was I going to say? So I'd worry more about that side of things rather than necessarily size of the pitch. No one's expecting you to go out there and check whether the penalty spot is in the exact right place, or check whether it is exactly 9.15 meters from the top of the dome at the top of it. Or you don't really need to worry about that stuff. As long as the players are happy to play on the pitch when they get to the pitch, that's fine. Don't worry about the dimensions. You don't need to measure the pitch yourself, but definitely have corner flags. The other thing that's interesting about this law is you don't need goal nets. Nowhere in the laws does it say that you need a goal net. You need posts. You can't play without actual goal posts, but you don't need nets. And the other thing I found interesting when I was doing my research on this, believe it or not, I did actually read the law for research of this, is the technical area. So in the technical area, it says the technical area relates to matches played in stadiums with a designated sitting area for team officials, substitutes, and substituted players, as outlined below. And it just kind of talks about the markings and the size of it and stuff like that. But it also says the occupants of the technical area are identified before the start of the match in accordance with the competition rules. So that's really important. You can't have some dude rocking up halfway through the first half who just wants to sit there if you don't know who he is and it's not been recognized. So that's important to manage. And the other thing as well is they must behave in a responsible manner. Well, yeah. I mean, that's
that's slightly more difficult.
Of course. And then the other one, only one person at a time is authorized to convey tactical instructions from the technical area. That's in the laws. Have you ever clamped down on a bench for having more than one person giving technical instructions at any one time?
No, but you don't generally have the time to be sort of paying that much attention to what's going on. But it's interesting you say about the who's allowed in the technical area, because I don't know if you saw this week, but there's been stuff in the newspaper about who's the defender who went from Man City to Arsenal.
I don't know.
Anyway, so he was in a recent match where he wasn't playing, wasn't named in the squad, so should not have been anybody on the bench. Certainly should not be in the technical area.
Yep.
And he was out lambasting the fourth official, and so there's been a sort of bit of an outrage about the fact that he shouldn't have even been there. And but just going back to your corner flag point, I mean, you're playing a level of football where you can probably turn around and say, we're not playing that corner flags. I'm playing refereeing a level of football where there often aren't corner flags, because
they don't need to be flags, do they? You just need to be corner posts. Like you can have you get like those plastic poles with spikes on the bottom of them.
I mean, I find that some of the municipal pitches we go to, where sort of you're hiring a pitch and the equipment, or so-called equipment, you'll often turn up and there are no corner flags, and that's right. A nightmare for an amateur referee like me, where you've got to you're trying to sort of get your decisions right. That makes your life very, very difficult, and then it gets even more. Well, that gets compounded in some of the games I have to referee, where you don't have enough substitutes to be assistants. Which is a whole other problem as well. But
I mean, I think at your level, like a lot of this is you have to use as much common sense as possible, despite what the laws say. Like your game isn't going to be made or broken by the fact that you put a game on because there wasn't corner flags. Like clubs, there comes a point where clubs will just be like, we didn't have corner flags. And as much as the competition, like body, if you abandon the game or if you don't let the game go ahead or whatever, they will stand by you. They'll also be equally annoyed by you for cancelling it for something which could be regarded as fairly trivial. What I would say is if you was to get to the pitch and you didn't have corner flags and no one kind of cared whether there was corner flags, I would ask the questions and I would be very forthright myself in going, we need corner flags. I can't guarantee this game will go ahead without corner flags. And if you take that stance to it, you'd be amazed how quickly people do actually find them.
Yeah. I couldn't find anything in the laws, and I don't think there's any other law that deals with it in respect of, the problem about quality of pitches, because you'll remember from sort of early refereeing days, you're often playing on pitches which are frozen pitches, waterlogged pitches with sort of big holes in it, where somebody says, oh, it's okay, we'll just put down a sort of marker or something to help people realize there's a big hole here. I mean, you're ultimately responsible for letting the game go ahead. You're ultimately hold a position of responsibility should people get injured. So, I mean, what do you say about those sorts of problems?
I think, I'm quite surprised. It's definitely not in Law 1. I don't know if it's in like the bit at the back of the book that's like, here's suggestions for referees, which we'll get to as well, I'm sure, at some point on this podcast. When I was in the UK, like I used to always look at the pitch and be like, how hard is the pitch? Like if I was to fall over on that and think, ow, that really hurt. Or like it sometimes you used to get bits of mud that were frozen so stiff and they'd like be frozen upwards. They look like mini mounds or something. I'd be like, if you used to slide in on that, you could take your kneecap off. Like that's not safe. And it's generally a feeling. Usually, quite often, you'll get to a pitch and you'll get one team that's saying there's no way we're playing on this pitch. And you'll get one team that really wants to play on the pitch. And usually the team that doesn't want to play on the pitch is a team that is about to get absolutely trashed by the other team. But my suggestion would be, if people feel like it's too dangerous, then don't go ahead. Just call the game off.
The bigger problem for me is that I suspect that that's a decision that's quite easy to make if you're refereeing two pub teams that have come 3 miles. When we're refereeing in our national league, we've got teams who like paid a fortune to come down from Glasgow for a weekend to play a game of football in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
And, on a Sunday morning, they all turned up, and the pressure on the referee then
Yep. It's different.
to say the game can go ahead is really difficult, really
Yep.
difficult.
Then what I would suggest there, in that instance, if you've got someone, weather's semi-predictable. Like if you've had a bout of bad weather, that's going to have an effect on the pitch. Pitches don't recover that quickly, right? So, and also equally to that, you should know whether you have the appointment in advance enough. So, you might know a week in advance or whatever. So what I'd do in that case, I would call both teams or email both teams. I'd probably call them if it's kind of lower league football, just because they probably don't look at their emails enough or are diligent enough. The team from Glasgow or the team that's traveled a long way, I'd say to them, look, when are you coming down? What time are you coming? What day are you coming, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd get their timeline of travel. And then I would say, look, weather's pretty bad down here. Pitches have been awful. We haven't had a game in X amount of weeks. I'm going to make a decision on the pitch on Friday before you come down Saturday morning. And we'll just have to go with that. If it gets worse, I can't help that. Like if we have a bad day Saturday, I can't help that. But at least then they know you're doing everything you can to try and make sure the pitch, or to try and stop them from traveling. And then what I do is I'd go and do a pitch inspection that Friday, and I'd call them from the pitch and go, it's not playable today. You can still come down if you want in the hope, but I can't guarantee the game will go ahead. And then it's the same. It's exactly the same approach as I take on the pitch. Be proactive. Just be a proactive referee. And then you're not in a really bad situation on Sunday morning where, and you said to them, I said to you, this might not go ahead because the pitches are really bad. You decided to travel. That's it, and just put it back on them.
What's the ultimate test insofar as playing where there's, for example, a lot of water on the pitch? I mean, is it purely about safety? Is it a case of, will the game be one which you can actually play? The ball's not going to keep getting stopped in big puddles of water. I mean, I can't find anything in the laws, or certainly I can't remember anything in laws that sort of sets out what the conditions have to be for you to play a game. So is it just a question of judgment?
I think so. I think like if there's standing water on a pitch, I'm just not putting the game ahead, because what happens there is, the ball will stop in that water, and then you're going to end up, and as the ball stops, you're going to end up with two players overrunning or sliding in or something like that. And then from there, you get another problem in terms of contact, in terms of, potential injuries and stuff like that. So if I have standing water, I'm almost certainly not letting that game go ahead. Mainly because the ball won't run properly. And therefore, if you can't predict the run of the ball well enough, that will then cause problems for players. And those problems mean late tackles, and late tackles means broken shins.
I'm always thinking about, unsurprisingly, about personal liability as a referee.
I don't know, but I don't think you have any. Honestly, I don't.
I don't think you do in affiliated football.
Right.
But I don't think there's anything that would stop somebody, if they, for example, received a really bad injury on a pitch that objectively you should never have played on. I don't think there's anything that would stop somebody taking action against the referee if they felt that you had let the match go ahead when you shouldn't have done.
Right, potentially. But then that's also why this isn't a decision that you make on your own. So if the pitch seems slightly below standard, if you have any concerns at all about the pitch, the first thing I would do is call both the captains in, both the managers in, and I'd discuss it with them. And I would say to them, I want you to go back to your teams. I want you to get what they think about the pitch. And I want you to tell me whether they want the game to go ahead or not. And then what you're doing there is you're saying, I'm letting you make the decision. And then, like I said before, if one team says yes, one team says no, it's a no. Most of the time, it's just, nah, you can't play on it. I'm sorry. If they're not happy, if they're really not happy, then I can't risk it. I just can't. I don't want to risk the injury, and we're going to have to call it off.
And I think if it was a borderline type situation where you had some reservations, but the teams are both very keen to play,
yep.
I think I'd probably want to get that conversation where both teams are consenting witnessed by somebody or recorded
Maybe.
or something,
Yep.
because I can foresee, problems if somebody got very nastily injured as a consequence of
Yeah.
playing on a pitch where there were problems.
I would also say I've never heard of a referee being sued for that reason. I think footballers at all levels understand that they take to the pitch under their own risk of injury, under their own risk of participating in a sport. And to call negligence on a referee would be very, very difficult, I think, and would be very hard. But you're the lawyer. And I've never heard of a case of that. I mean, I might be wrong. Listeners, you tell me if you've heard of it, because it'd be really interesting to know. You're about to say you had a case, aren't you? In this instance.
But my gut feeling is that if the referee had been negligent in allowing the match to go ahead when objectively it shouldn't have happened, I can't think of why you wouldn't be able to bring an action against a referee.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Well,
now,
I don't.
Now, players who listen to this are going to be looking to sue referees.
Well, I think that I think there might be a distinction between affiliated and unaffiliated football, because I think if you're refereeing affiliated football, I think you're insured through your football association. I think that's why a lot of referees are quite anxious about refereeing unaffiliated football, because you don't then have that protection.
Yeah,
which is one of the problems that I have in the games that I'm often refereeing.
Right. I'd also like to say at this point, people, even though you might not think it, people are very, very, very grateful for referees. And they're very grateful for the fact that we do the job we do, and that we do allow people who are well past their prime to keep playing football and things like that. For them to then get injured and blame that on completely the referees, like the referee totally, based on the pitch, the quality of the pitch, I think you've got to be really unlucky. I know it only takes one person one time at one point, but I just don't think people in the football community throughout the entire footballing pyramid have that view of referees. I think they know referees are always trying to do their best. Like you're not putting the game on because you just want to get paid. You're not putting the game on because you just think people will get injured. Everyone knows that referees are doing, basically we're referees because we want to do what's best for football. Like, that's why I became a referee. I like being a guardian of the game almost. And so
I think the problem is though, is that I again, from a law's perspective, always looking at the worst case scenario. And you're right. The general attitude is, thank God we had a referee. But you get a player who breaks their leg in a very, very bad way that means that they are unable to run properly for the rest of their life, or it's going to affect their life. That's the situation you always need to be thinking about, because what you don't want is someone bringing a cause of action against you because you have been negligent and you're failed in your duty of care. But I'm going to go and look at it. Something we can maybe come back to in a future episode, because I think it is quite an interesting thing something people should be aware of.
And I think on that, like just being as proactive as possible, getting a witness. I mean, I never did, but that's probably a good idea. I probably didn't, just because I didn't believe it ever happened. And equally, I'm quite forthright in having those strong discussions with people. But if you're not quite as forthright in having those strong discussions with teams, then get a witness. Just cover yourself. And even if you do that, like even if someone on the pitch is likely to sue you, they're now like 90% less likely, simply because they're like, well, he got a witness, we all signed it or whatever. They had the conversation, we decided to go ahead. Like, I'm sure it'll be fine. I think it'd be a very hard case to bring. But I don't want to scare people off of refereeing.
No, of course not. No, because there's enough difficulties in getting referee numbers as it is.
Exactly. I think it's extremely highly unlikely. So the field of play, Ed's got some interesting stats about the sizes of football pitches in the Premier League, don't you?
Well, it was such a sort of dull law that I didn't think we'd have very much to talk about. So I thought it was interesting to sort of go away and look into sort of differing pitch sizes. And what's quite interesting is the Premier League tried a few years ago to standardize the size of pitches. So they said that pitches should be 105 meters by 68 meters, which is exactly the size of the Wembley pitch, unsurprisingly. But then they had
the pitches at St George's Park.
St George's, but there is an exemption to that general rule if your stadium is too small to accommodate it. And so there are 6 Premier League clubs that have an exemption because they can't accommodate them.
Should we try and guess them? Should we try and guess them?
I've only made a note of 2 of them. So
I imagine Bournemouth would be one. Are they still in the Premiership? Oh no, Brighton and Hove Albion's probably fine because
they've got their new stadium.
Yeah.
You might be a bit surprised actually.
Yeah.
Liverpool, Anfield,
yeah,
has an exemption.
Merseyside, not Merseyside, Everton, because that's an old stadium.
It might do, but Fulham, I know, is another one.
Yeah, that makes sense. Craven Cottage.
And if you ever go and watch a game at Anfield, the one thing that strikes you immediately is there's no runoff. I mean, it's the crowd are on top of the pitch.
Yeah.
But also what's quite interesting is that because we said earlier on about how there's that sort of big divergence of what is a sort of a pitch that you can use in terms of the laws, that does make a big difference in terms of the actual size of the pitch. So, for example, the City ground, so Nottingham Forest ground,
that's quite
small. It's that's the biggest.
Oh, really?
105 meters long, so that's the right length, but it's 3 meters wider. And so that has got a square meterage of 7,455, right? And I give you that figure, not because it's particularly exciting, but just get into your head the idea of something about 7,500.
Right. I only say it's small because I drove past it on the motorway and it looked small, but clearly the stadium's small, but the pitch is massive.
But Fulham has the smallest pitch, I think, in the Premier League, which is 100 meters long, so 5 meters shorter and 65 meters wide, so 6 meters narrower than the City ground. So their square meter is only 6,500. So 1,000 meters, 1,000 square meter difference in pitch size. Isn't that mad?
I just imagine now, like when like the panel of referees for the Premier League get their fixtures through, they're like,
they all want the small one.
To Nottingham Forest. I can't be a Fulham.
Well, they must have been delighted when Forest got promoted to the Premiership this year, and they're suddenly thinking, "Good Lord." And what's also quite interesting is that there've been the topic of pitch sizes has been something that's been in the media before, and I found 2 interesting examples, or 2 interesting ones for me. One was that apparently Graham Souness, when he was manager of Rangers back in 1987, was playing European game. They were playing Dynamo Kiev. They were 1-0 down from the first leg, second leg at home, and apparently Graham Souness recognised that they had. Kiev had 2 great wingers, so he allowed the Kiev team to warm up and do their training the night before on the pitch in its full width, and then once they left for the evening, he instructed the groundsman to bring it down to its narrowest level, so reduce it by a few meters.
Yep.
And they won. They ended up winning 2-1.
Rangers
and it was
won.
also Rangers won. Yeah.
Wow.
And Pochettino, when Spurs were playing at White Hart Lane before they moved to the nice new stadium, that was a small pitch as well. That was 100 meters by 67. So that was literally just a bit bigger than Fulham's pitch. And when they lost a game back in 2014 to Newcastle, he moaned about the fact that the pitch wasn't big enough to play the sort of expensive football that he wanted to play. So it's just interesting that there's a really big difference between the smallest and biggest pitch in the Premier League. Anyway, that's
home field advantage, right? Home field advantage.
Well, exactly.
I mean, I suppose it doesn't really affect referees, other than you probably can't change the dimensions of the pitch like Graham Souness did anymore. Like you probably once the pitch is set, it's probably set. But again, this is a difference, isn't it, between like Premier League refereeing and sort of what we do. Like you just don't need to worry about that. Like those
you turn up,
ain't going to come up. Yeah.
It looks like a rectangle. There's goalposts.
Yep, no nets. And
the lines have been marked out. You're good to go.
Here, some of the pitches have blue lines, and it's the most annoying thing in the world.
On green pitches?
Yeah.
That's a bit weird, isn't it?
I know, it's a bit weird. I don't even know if you're allowed it, to be honest, in terms of the laws. But hey ho. Again, it's one of those situations, isn't it? I'm not going to call it off.
I don't remember reading anything about the lines having to be white.
No, I don't either. So it's probably fine. I'd be surprised because here it's all quite well structured. Like here, every club has a stadium. The pitches are managed by the councils, and so they're well looked after. Like it is here, you get very few like worries about pitches and things like that. It's all very well organised in that sense, which is to great credit to Queensland.
The only thing I found about colour from law number 1, which is my last point for law number 1, was that the goalpost must be white.
Yep. That's interesting, isn't it?
That's the only interesting
I've
thing.
never, I mean, I know it sounds daft, but I've never, ever, ever seen goalposts that weren't white.
No.
And I don't know if that's because the law, like, I suppose, well, of course not because the law, but even like on non-fields that people don't play in, like just posts, like just on a pitch somewhere, or not even on a pitch, in a park or whatever, they're always white no matter what. It's just in the zeitgeist of the human psyche.
Well, there we go. So that's all I've got to say about law number 1.
Law number 1, done and dusted.
Not very exciting, I'm afraid. There'll be other laws that will be much more interesting and much more things to talk about. But law number 1 is not the best of them.
No, I also want to just say, in terms of this podcast, like we're not doing this podcast because we think we know it all, or we think we're great referees, or like we think we're an authoritative referees or anything, like an authority on the laws. Quite the opposite. I'm kind of doing this because I need to learn the laws so much better, and I figured this would be the best way in which to do it. And then if I can share that journey with other people, then why the hell not? So like, we're not on here going, well, this is right, this is wrong, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, like things like that. Like, we can only talk about our experiences, obviously.
Yeah.
And yeah, but there's many, many, many far better referees. And actually, like, part of the reason we did this was we thought, well, we could always get people on if we wanted to talk things about, like, I've never dealt with VAR and things like that,
Yeah.
And up here you get quite good access to like the FIFA referees in Queensland and the A-League referees and stuff, and we know a couple of other guys as well, don't we, over in the UK?
Yeah, well, I mean, we might get to, through the course of podcast, maybe hear from some referees, and because as you say, we've got friends who've either refereed at a very high level or are refereeing at a very high level, so there may be some of the laws which might be interesting to get the input from people who actually really know what they're doing, as opposed to people like me, who, as you say, is sort of trying to learn as we go along.
Bumbling along. Yeah. And to that point as well, like, I also don't want this to become like people sending their suggestions to us, like, or they're like, did you see this tackle? Should it have been a red card or whatever? Like, I'm not gonna spend time on this podcast digging out referees who were in the middle of a game. There's always discussion, of course, but I don't think we want to get into a slagging match of referees and their decisions over the weekend. Do you know what I mean?
Don't get me on the topic. I mean, Chelsea have been at the bad end of some bad refereeing.
Oh, of course they have. Right. See, this is the other thing as well. See, I don't support a football club, whereas you do. And so I think what will be very obvious in this discussion will be your fan bias compared to my neutral view on it. Speaking of which, did you see the tackle Richarlison went through from the City player?
I have
when
to
he
say,
was showboating.
I mean, what did you expect was going to happen if you come on as a substitute and start showboating to a team that have just come into the Premier League?
Exactly.
I'm afraid he got what was coming to him. And it was a very sweet moment to watch.
If anything, it was a foul against the guy who tackled Richarlison, because Richarlison fell over and then tripped him over. No, someone sent it to me and I went, well, what do you expect? That's what's going to happen. You can't do that at that level. But yeah, I mean, I hope Richarlison didn't hurt himself, obviously. But yeah,
that was the Man City Forest game where Man City. No, it wasn't. It was the Spurs game, wasn't it? Spurs. Yeah. They won it 2-0, I think, didn't they? But it wasn't the sort of game where they were dominating, where people can come on and showboat. And that's what he did. And I don't think the Forest players or fans enjoyed it at all. But I think occasionally things will pop up that have happened that will merit some comment.
Of course, it will. But like, I just I like, one of my cousin already texted me. He was like, "Oh, you could talk about this decision. You could talk about that decision. You could talk about this decision." I'm like, it's a very different game at that level to what it is at our level, and you can't always understand the context of how things happen and why they get to that point. And so,
but the reason why
that is important.
So many people like talking about these events that happen in matches is because they're interesting, because some people don't understand what the law that's being applied to those particular instances are. And also they don't understand that there's a lot of individual perception, from a referee's point of view. Absolutely. And not everything is hard and fast and clear in terms of laws. It's about your interpretation and what you make of it, which is why it's such great fodder for pub conversations where people say, well, it was a definite yellow or definite red. So, things like that will pop up, I'm sure, during the course of the podcast, but we're not going to spend all our time talking about it.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, I had a very interesting discussion with one of my clients. He's an Arsenal fan, and Michael Oliver gave 2 yellow cards in like the same phase of play to one player a couple of seasons ago. We had
No, it's this season. It's this season.
Last season.
Oh, this similar thing happened this season though. That might
really?
not be Michael Oliver. Yeah, but same
Right.
phase of play, 2 yellows. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was an interesting discussion. It was very heated, and he was dead set against it. He was like, "You can't send the player off for that." I'm like, "Yes, you can," because it was 2 yellow cards. He was like, "No, but it's not this," and we got into such a row about it. It was good fun. Yeah, we're still friends though. That's fine.
So we want to welcome anybody who wants to sort of send any questions or comments about the podcast. Any questions they want to ask about refereeing generally, doesn't necessarily have to be about the law we're considering for the next week. We're happy to sort of answer questions that anybody might want to pose of us. And when this goes online, we'll provide details of how you can get in touch with us.
Absolutely. I'm happy if you just want to send me a voice note on Instagram, or if you know me personally, you can WhatsApp me or whatever, or on Facebook Messenger, and we'll just play those questions through. Like, voice notes would be awesome. Imagine that if we got like loads of different referees around the world asking us questions and just having a discussion with us about that. And we could hear their voices. That'd be really interesting and really cool.
And not just questions, but also, comments about what we've talked about, or anything from their own experience that they want to contribute. That'd be really good to hear from people.
Absolutely. And do you want to give out your social media things or not?
Yeah, we'll put that when we post the podcast. I'll put that up so people can get in touch with me through social media as well.
Perfect. I think we've nailed law 1. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, we could. Well, we've nailed law 1 in about 2 minutes, about 60 minutes ago.
What's it called? Law 1. What's it called? The pitch. Is it the pitch?
Isn't it the field of play?
Yeah, it's the field of play.
It's the field of. Oh, I see. Sorry. Yeah,
it's
there we go.
FOP, the field of play. Awesome. Right.
So what's law 2? What have we got to look forward to?
Is it the ball? Oh golly, if I've got that wrong. I'm quickly looking it up. Where is it? It must be the ball. How do you not know this, Edward? You're the lawyer.
No, I've had a busy day.
It is. It's the ball. I got it right.
There we go. That's going to be a thrilling episode. You wait till I get my fun facts about the football.
Used to be a pig's bladder.
Exactly. There we go. And more thrilling facts like that to come next time.
Excellent. On Red or Yellow. Cool. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you so much for being here. We truly appreciate it. And I hope you found it informative, educational, and fun, because that's basically what these things need to be. Ed, I hope you have the most amazing Friday night.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your refereeing today and your Saturday morning, and speak to you next week about Law 2.
Yeah, let's hope the rain stops, because there's nothing worse than being a fourth official in the rain. Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Red or Yellow. You're clearly a very fit listener. May I gently remind you to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Tell all your friends. And don't forget to please share it with any refereeing groups that you may have. Good luck on the fields out there this week. And if you have any questions, please make sure you send them in to us on social media. Voice notes or written questions would be brilliant. And we will, of course, include them in the podcast. Have the most wonderful day. Ciao, ciao.